ask this, and for the folks in the back, can you hear me okay if I don't use this mic?
Yep.
Because I'm going to be speaking into the remote and trying to change the screen with this if I have one in each hand. So let's try this without it. Before I begin, I want to say thanks again to Sea Grant for inviting us and to Sportsman's Direct for hosting us, and to all of you for coming out and sharing the information with us tonight. Before I start to talk on a question that we have received often lately, and whether or not there are too many muskie in Lake St. Clair and whether or not that population is out of balance, I want to acknowledge my co-authors, Mike Thomas, Cleo Harris over at the Waterford office, and Jim Francis, who is our Lake Erie Basin coordinator, and who I'm going to divide and conquer this talk with here tonight. So, to start out, I'm going to give you an idea where we're going to go with this. Just a brief outline is we're going to do a little bit of a history on Lake St. Clair, how we got where we are today, look at some of the changes that have occurred in the system from an ecological perspective, talk a little bit about human dimensions and the social aspects of the fishery that we have here, and talk a little bit about some of the common muskie myths and facts that we hear about and some of the questions that are asked about it. So, to begin with the historical perspective on Lake St. Clair, going all the way back to pre-settlement times, the watershed was heavily forested, there were abundant wetlands, there was clear water, aquatic plants, and these ecological conditions really favored muskie, northern pike, smallmouth bass, over fish species such as walleye. And you can go back to this 1893 Aquatic Plant Survey in Michigan waters, and one of the quotes that they had was, "The bottom of the lake, wherever examined, was found much to be covered by plants. And it's probable that this also covers the bottom of the whole lake." So, a lot of aquatic plants at the time, those conditions really favored muskies, pike and bass. That's reflected in some of the early fishing photos that we have. So we don't have a lot of records and data that go back this far, but there are some photos from back in the day that show a lot of smallmouth bass and muskie that were being harvested by anglers at the time. So you can see some of these photos here to show dozens of smallmouth bass, a number of muskie there, and that reflected also the sentiment of anglers at the time, which was they valued harvest, that took a lot of fish home. These are all from the early 1900s. Going back a little bit to the late 1800s, this is when we as humans really started to have an effect on the landscape. Settlement was increasing, along with that came deforestation, a lot of development with agriculture, industry, the urban development, and by 1950, the lake itself had really changed. So we saw a shift in Lake St. Clair habitat. We saw the water become more turbid, there was reduced aquatic plants, and those turbid, low light conditions really favored predators such as walleye over muskie and smallmouth bass for a lot of the reasons that Mike had just touched upon. So moving on, now we're up into the 1970s and the habitat changes again. And one of the pivotal moments was the Clean Water Act in 1972, which reduced a lot of the nutrient loadings and point source pollution. Following that, in the 1980s, was the zebra mussel invasion. There were incredibly high densities of zebra mussels beginning to take hold, particularly after Thames River over in Ontario. As you know, zebra mussels are filter feeders. They filter a lot of the plankton and so on out of the water, and that created an energy shift in the system. So the phytoplankton, the base of the food web, and primary production, algae, things like that, really dropped, and with that, water clarity increased. We saw a water level decline in the late 1980s that when you combine that with that increased water clarity, really allowed a lot more sunlight to penetrate through the water column, and that increased plant growth. So we saw that shift from where historically we had a lot of aquatic plants in clear water, shifted over to more turbid conditions, and then shifted back again to clear water and more abundant aquatic vegetation. You can really see the expansion of those rooted aquatic plants in some plant surveys that were done in the late 1970s on into the 1990s. So, let's see if I can find a laser pointer here. Yeah, so if you look at this one, it's 1978. You can see the aquatic plants here up in Anchor Bay. And then when you move on to 1990, how those are spreading from Anchor Bay on down through the Michigan waters, and they're even becoming more abundant over on the Ontario side. And then when you look at the most recent in this series from 1994, you can see that aquatic plants cover a large proportion of the lake. So much so that there's a 5-fold increase in aquatic land cover in Ontario waters. Again, that is an increase in the quantity and the quality of habitats that are available for muskies. Not only adults and juveniles, but reproductive habitat as well. So that's a little bit of a history of the shift that we've seen in the lake and the habitat. What I want to touch on right now is some of the changes that we've seen in muskie regulations in the system over time. So this is focusing on Michigan waters only. In the 1950s and the early 1960s, it was very, very liberal. We had no closed season, no bag limit, no minimum size limit. In 1969, there was concern amongst biologists about overexploitation of the population. So the season closed during the winter, from December 15th to the first Saturday in June, winter and spawning closure. What this did is this effectively eliminated the spearing fishery that was going on at the time. And one other thing I want to note too is that spearing has never been legal over in Ontario, so we have that difference in regulation through time. By 1970, we had shifted to a 30-inch minimum size limit and a 1-fish bag limit was in place. And that was, again, to start getting over this concern of the overexploited population. We saw a truncated age distribution when we looked at the fishery, and also the size distribution was skewed as well towards the smaller individuals. So there were some tweaks that were done to the regulations through time, and primarily that was with the minimum size limits. And those increased to 36 inches in 1976, 38 inches in 1981, 40 inches in 1987, and then to 42 inches in 1995. And this is really what started a recovery of the population. In 2013, we had the most recent change, as that was when the statewide muskie bag limit was set at 1 fish per year with that harvest tag requirement. With the changes in regulations, we also saw some changes in muskie angler behavior. The year-round season that included that winter spearing until 1969, again, if you recall at the time, that was a very heavily or harvest-oriented fishery. You can go back and look at, here's an old photo from a tournament, and they've got the muskie that are hanging off the pole here. Here's another one, heavily harvest-oriented fishery at that time. The researchers at the time estimated the muskie harvest probably exceeded 4,000 fish annually prior to 1970. Fast forward to today, by the early 1980s, some muskie anglers were starting to already practice that voluntary catch and release. Tournament weigh-in formats involved with that too. So they evolved from the format where you had nearly all the fish that were sacrificed to formats with very few fish being sacrificed for the weigh-ins. And that had really taken hold by the mid-2000s. So we've got a strong shift in angler behavior from harvest to catch and release that came along with those regulations. And we see that in some Ontario Creel Survey data. So these are Creel Survey estimates from 1978 to 1990 that estimated that the percent of the catch harvested declined from 80% to less than 10% through time during that period. So you can see that much greater percentage of the muskie catch back in the 1970s and 1980s was harvested compared to today. And that was a combination of regulations and angler attitude shifting. That's also reflected in the charter boat fishery too. So these are data from 2015, and what that shows is out of the about 1,800 muskie that were reported captured by charter fishermen in the lake, only one of those was harvested. So we've got a 99.8% release rate. And you can see that sentiment again reflected. This is a quote from a charter boat website on Lake St. Clair that recommends practicing the catch and release technique, following suit with close to 99% of all muskies catches in Lake St. Clair, making this fishery so exceptional. The statistics say it all, about 3,000 muskies boated in the past 5 years. Even more amazing, only one was taken home. So you see that strong sentiment in the angling community of shifting from harvest to catch and release. So when you take a look at the big picture, we've got three things going on here. We've got the changes in habitat, pollution abatement, and invasive species coming in that really caused some huge changes in the water clarity, the plant abundance, available spawning habitat, and juvenile habitat as well. We've got changes in people, changes in the social attitudes and behavior, moving from harvest to catch and release, which is decreasing the mortality and increasing the spawning stock. And then we've got changes that, as a department, we've enacted. Changes in fishing regulations to reduce mortality, which has increased our spawning stock abundance through these time periods. And what the response of the muskie population has been is more fish and bigger fish. So that's a little bit of a history on how we got here. Now I want to kind of shift over to the ecological perspective of this. Mike started to touch on a lot of this, and some of the recent and ongoing changes that we have seen in the Lake St. Clair habitat is that one, quagga mussels are starting to replace zebra mussels, and really have, for the most part, replaced them. As Mike said, those survive with less food. They colonize softer substrates in deeper water areas, and the zebra mussels are mostly mainly found near the tributaries. So we've got this shift in the invasive mussels going from zebras over to quaggas. Again, those continually filter the water. Combine that with the shift that we've seen in the Lake Huron food web. If you know anything about the salmon fishery in Lake Huron, you know that that crashed because of the alewife crash. We've seen those alewives disappear here as well. So now alewives are gone. The Lake Huron salmon fishery collapsed. With that, we've seen huge changes in primary productivity in Lake Huron. So we've got extremely unproductive water coming down through the system now from Lake Huron. And we're seeing that in Lake St. Clair. Seeing it in the St. Clair River. St. Clair River, for example, is now ultra clear. Low in nutrients, low in algae, and low in zooplankton. That's the water that feeds Lake St. Clair. So we've got this extremely unproductive water coming down through the system too. With that change in productivity in the lower food web, we've seen changes in the forage fish community here in Lake St. Clair. As I had said before, alewives have been nearly absent since 2004. We've seen declines in spot-tail shiner abundance, a decline in shrub perch, and even a decline recently in round gobies. And as Mike had mentioned earlier, with that decline in round gobies, now we're starting to see some of the native species that were less common earlier start to rebound, like log perch and Johnny Dark. So we're seeing that change in the food web that has been, again, brought on by those habitat changes within the lake. So one question that we get a lot with muskie is, are there too many of them? And when you ask whether or not there's too many muskie, you can be asking a couple different things. You can be asking, say, a yellow perch angler, whether there's too many muskie. They might think, yes, there are too many. I think they're eating the yellow perch. If you ask a muskie angler, you might get a totally different answer. They say, no, we'd like to have more muskie. We want to see catch rates go up. You can ask it from a biological perspective. That's what I want to touch on here, is the concept of the carrying capacity of the lake. What the carrying capacity is, it's the maximum number of individuals that can be supported sustainably by a given environment. So what will the habitat within the lake support as far as muskies go? And what it comes down to is the carrying capacity is a dynamic equilibrium between the availability of different habitat components, so think food, water, shelter, and space, and the number of organisms that that habitat can support. When you look at whether or not a species is at or above carrying capacity, there's a number of ecological indicators or signs that you'll see. Some of those might include reduced growth rate, changes in condition, their health might become poor, and reductions in recruitment. And obviously with that, you probably see increases in natural mortality, disease and starvation. And the end result of that is typically a major decrease in the abundance of that population down to a level that the capacity of the habitat can support. So touching on a few of these concepts for muskie, first one I want to talk about here is growth, and we'll do this by females and males. Beginning with the females, you can see that for Lake St. Clair, we've got a couple different colors going on here. We've got red, which was 1969 to 1974, the blue squares, which are 78 to 79, and then the purple squares here, which are 2005 to 2008. Comparing that with the Detroit River from 2013 to 2015, and then Lake Hudson from 2001 to 2009. What we can see here is that there has been a little bit of a change through time here. If you look at the Detroit River, early on was, actually, when you look at these ages, growth is slightly above what we see at Lake St. Clair here. And these are all data that we have collected as a division, either through our muskie 8K program or through our TrackNet surveys. And then you can see the Lake St. Clair is just a little bit below that Detroit River population for the most part, but we've still got incredibly large individuals here, on up to 50 inches. When you compare that with Lake Hudson, which is a very, very, very dense muskie population, you can see that our growth rates are way above that. So what we've got here is a very high density population where the growth rates are lower. Lake St. Clair muskies are growing faster than that. So no concern yet with muskie growth when you look at females. When you look at males, the one thing you'll notice is that their overall length is a lot smaller, and that's likely due to the fact that they mature a lot earlier. And so, again, just looking at the pattern here, though, we see again that the Detroit River and Lake St. Clair populations are well above the growth rates that we see here for that dense Lake Hudson population. So, no concern when you think about it from a growth perspective. Looking at survival, I think this is one of the most interesting figures that we have here from the data. If you look at the colors of the bars here, so we've got Lake St. Clair 69 through 74 are these blue bars, and then the red and green bars are Lake St. Clair from 2005 to 2010, and the Detroit River from 2013 to 2015. And what you can see in that population from the 60s and early 70s is that size distribution and age distribution here is heavily truncated towards younger, smaller individuals. And that's a sign of that overexploited population. The regulations and attitudes have changed at this time, and now you see the individuals growing to the much larger and older ages. So heavily truncated back in the 1960s, early 1970s. Compare that with what we see today, where we have a much larger percentage of the population growing out to those older and larger sizes. So no issues or no concerns there related to overabundance. So let's think about disease a little bit. There were a number of pathogens that were identified in Lake St. Clair muskie. This occurred really during the 2003 to 2006 time period. One of the first ones was Piscirrhachexia or muskie pox. We had a few mortalities observed from that. The next big one was VHS, viral hemorrhagic septicemia. That caused some pretty large-scale mortalities in 2003 and 2006, not only in muskie, but other fish within the population as well. Then we've also seen Issacet herpes virus 1, or EHV1, or blue spot disease. No mortalities have been observed from that, but we did see these three pathogens show up during this time period. Since that time, there's been no apparent disease-related mortality outbreaks since 2006. So again, looking at it from the ecological perspective of, are we seeing disease outbreaks because we're over carrying capacity? No, we're not. Recruitment, spawning success and survival of young fish appears good. Mike touched on our recruitment survey that we're starting with our electrofishing boat. Caught a number of H0 muskies last year in that survey, and we're also hearing reports of many small young muskies being caught by anglers. So no concerns with recruitment, again, when you think about it from the carrying capacity perspective. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim Francis. At this time, Jim is going to start by touching upon some of the human dimensions associated with muskies in the St. Clair Detroit River system.
Thanks, Todd. And well, it looks like I'm batting cleanup tonight, so I'll get you through the last part of this presentation. And really, the last couple of presentations are going to kind of build upon each other. So Mike talked about the general fish community and set that up well. Todd started out the muskie talk and talked a little bit about the changes that we've seen in Lake St. Clair that have gotten us to this point. And talked a little bit about the biology of muskie. So I'm going to talk about the last two bullets, real briefly about human dimensions, and then also talk about muskie events and effects. So, okay, so there's, kind of look at it from a biological the second point here. If you ask an angler, are there too many muskies? It really comes down to perspective, right? I mean, if you're a perch angler, yeah, if you got more than one muskie, you probably got many muskie in their eyes. However, if you're a muskie angler, you want to see more and bigger muskies. So that kind of gets into the social side of it a little bit. So fisheries management is about managing people as much as it is about managing fish and habitat. And so we have to look at the social value when we're setting regulations. So now I'm gonna segue to common muskie myths and facts. We talk to anglers a lot, and we get different feedback, and we hear a lot of feedback from anglers, and a lot of it is just myths or just misinformation. So hopefully we can step through some of these and try to shed some light on it. So the first one we get is muskies are eating all the fill in the blank. Whatever you're fishing for, if you're a perch angler, they're eating the perch, right? You had a bad walleye day because the muskie ate them all. Well, we've got some really good diet data to start addressing this question. Recently, there was a graduate student at the University of Michigan that was collecting diet data, and she collected diet from 3 different techniques. Gastric lavage, that's a fancy term for stomach pump. So in the spring of 2014 and 15, she went out and collected fish from the Detroit River, and she also got charter boat catches from that same 2014-2015 period. Stomach pumped them. She also made contacts with local taxidermists. So when people brought fish in to get mounted, they took that stomach out and froze it, and she got additional samples that way. And then during our regular DNR surveys that Mike touched on earlier, we were able to collect some fish there as well. So what did we find? 167 muskies were sampled for diet, broadside range from 23 up to 55 inches, so a wide range of sizes of fish. We found 40 food items out of 36 non-empty stomachs. So roughly 20% of the fish that were sampled actually had empty stomachs. So what did we find? This is a percent composition of the different species found in the muskie diet. So again, this is for all 36 fish that have food items in it. I'm going to step through it here. These species are classified by family. So the blue area here is Moronid. That's basically white bass and your white perch. This darker area here is Catastomids. That's a family name for suckers. Cyprinids are your minnows and shiners. This kind of orangish bar is unidentified. So when we're looking at some contents on a fish, sometimes you just get some spines left or some vertebrae, but you can't piece it together to find out what the fish actually was. So that kind of falls into that unidentified category. The dark blue is Centrarchids, which is your bass and sunfish. Cyanid are your freshwater drum, commonly known as sheephead. The saucid are your muskie and pike. Ichalurd is your catfish family, and Perkiid are your perch and walleye. So as you can see, most of about 2/3 of the diet is made up of white perch, white bass, suckers, and minnows. We did find there was one perch in those 36 stomachs that were sampled. The 36 stomachs that had food in their stomachs. So we want to look at it by size too, because obviously bigger fish can eat bigger prey and vice versa. So we wanted to see if there were some comparisons there. So this, we had 9 muskie that were less than 30 inches, and they ate primarily cyprinids, so your minnows and giants. That kind of makes sense. You have smaller fish that can focus on smaller prey. We had 25 fish that fell into the category of greater than 30 inches, and we saw, again, primarily suckers and white perch and white bass. So some slight differences based on size, but again, the important take-home message is we're not seeing many game fish in the stomachs and the diets. So now we wanted to look at the baby muskies. So these are H0. So these are fish that were hatched in the spring. We went out and collected those fish in November. that here. I'll set these again because we've got some different families represented. Gobiid is basically round gobies. Clupids, those are alewife and gizzard shad, in this case primarily gizzard shad. Centrarchids, that's your bass and bluegill. This was primarily pumpkin seeds. We got unidentified fish again. Athrodonopsid is Brooks overside. They're small little fish. Look more, they're fusiform kind of minnow fish. You see them up on the surface, mainly at night. So I printed our minnows and shiners again, and furcate. So we found one muskie had 2 perch in its belly. So again, a wide range of fish, primarily gobies, gizzard shad, and pumpkin seeds. And for perch, we just didn't find very many perch in the diet. So I'm going to segue into some of the myths here. So muskies are eating all the Persian wall, and we've got, granted that what I just presented were some limited sample sizes, and that's a take-home message. We are going to continue to collect muskie diet data moving forward. We're going to try to make that data set more robust and look at it further. But from the evidence we do have is that the muskie diet has a diverse diet dominated by non-game fishes like white bass, suckers, minnows, drum, shad, and gobies. And from the data we've seen so far, we're just not finding perch and walleye in muskie diets, whether it be small or large muskies. Okay, so again, muskies are eating all the perch and walleye. Lake St. Clair is a predator-rich environment. Muskies aren't the only predators out there, and many predators are feeding on yellow perch, including smallmouth bass and walleye. And as we saw from Mike's presentation, at least for the smallmouth bass, we've got a very healthy population. And the survey indicates that we've got a good abundance of yellow perch, although they're not growing real fast. And I want to come back to this first point again. You know, there's a ecological benefit to having a predator-rich environment. And one of the biggest benefits is that it's a good defense against invasive species. And a good example is we're looking at sea liquor production in the St. Clair River. And we're starting to find more and more sea liquor production in the St. Clair River. And those fish migrate all the way into Lake Erie and have an impact on the fish community in Lake Erie. But what we found in studies is that the survival of those fish that are those sea lamprey hatched in the St. Clair River is much lower, making it all the way down to Lake Erie, than we see in some of our tributary streams. And the logical conclusion is that they've got to run the gauntlet of Lake St. Clair, Detroit River, and into Lake Erie of all these predators. So there really is a benefit to having an ecological benefit for having a healthy predator population. Okay, we hear this often, people are out fishing and they hook a perch and they start reeling it up and a muskie slams it. I mean, you hear that common. And in most cases, so naturally, the angler thinks, wow, they must be eating perch or walleye or bass. But really, predators have an instinct when they see a fish struggling that they strike it. And that's mainly what we're seeing. Is that instinct to strike at a struggling fish. And we see it even, some examples, you'll see that the fish that they're attacking, that the predator is attacking, is even much too large for the fish to even eat. It's just that instinct that triggers them to go. In one example, with the set lines that we use to catch sturgeon on the St. Clair River, these sturgeon get big. And, sometimes you bring up the set lines, these sturgeon, it looks like they've been attacked by presumably muskies. You're not going to be seeing sturgeon in the muskie diet. So again, it's just attacking prey that is much too big for them. But because that sturgeon is down there fighting against that hook, it triggers a response. And this picture was off the internet, so it's got to be fact, right? It's got to be factual. So, but you even hear stories of people getting hit by muskies. So, again, if it's on the internet, it's got to be true. this one kind of puzzles me. You know, we've heard people say that you know, this is another method that the DNR manages the lake for muskies. And you know, it's that old saying, picture it says 1,000 words. And I think these pictures, these are off of Lake St. Clair. I think they speak for itself. I mean, the important thing is that Lake St. Clair is an incredibly diverse fishery. It's an amazingly productive fishery, and it's completely self-sustaining. It's all natural reproduction. So, you know, this myth is kind of lost on me when people claim that we're managing it for muskies. As Mike talked about earlier, it's a very complex system, and we're managing multiple species. Okay, this came up a little bit earlier. Here's a map of the area. I'm not sure how well this shows up, but we've got a yellow line running along here, and that's the international border. And the point I want to make is that Michigan has about 1/3. So we actively manage about 1/3 of Lake St. Clair, and 2/3 of it is in Ontario management. For the St. Clair River and the Detroit River, it's roughly 50-50. So here's our muskie regulation summary. So we've got the same seasons between Michigan and Ontario. First Saturday in June through December 15th. There are some differences, and I think those came out earlier. We've got 42-inch minimum size limit in Michigan, and a 44-inch minimum size limit in Ontario. There is a difference in the possession limit. We've got a 1 fish per season limit in Michigan, and Ontario has a 1 fish per day. So, and again, this came up earlier. You know, most of the fishing for muskie takes place in Ontario waters. We're starting to get better information with our creel survey, but when we do our creel surveys, we typically interview just Michigan anglers. And the same for the charter industry. The charter industry has mandatory reporting, but only for Michigan waters. So a lot of our charter guys that run out of Michigan waters fish primarily for targeting muskies, are fishing primarily in Ontario, so we don't get records of that. So we don't have good hard data, but anecdotally, most of the fishing effort takes place on the Ontario side, especially in the middle of summer. So despite the higher effort, the more liberal background, there's no evidence of a greater percentage of muskie being harvested in Ontario versus Michigan waters. This is another one, you know, there's myths and there's facts. The myth is that we're stocking muskies in Lake St. Clair. And it's just frankly not true. Since 1972, so for the past 44 years, we've stocked a total of 0 muskie in the whole St. Clair system. We do collect brood stock, so we collect adult fish in springtime. Since 2011, we've been doing it here in the Isle area and the Detroit River. Those eggs are fertilized, taken to Wolf Lake State Fish Hatchery, they're raised there, and all of those fish are stocked in fluid waters. We don't have any of those fish going back to the St. Clair River system. And as part of that program, 10 muskie per year are sacrificed to do a full health assessment. So the good point, you know, take-home message and the good news is that all of the muskie we have in Lake St. Clair is all natural reproduction. Another myth is we had a change in regulations I talked about earlier. From it used to be a possession limit with 1 fish per day, and that's changed to 1 fish per season. And we hear complaints that it was, you know, that was lobbying by local clubs and charter boats that wanted to see a better muskie fishery. And that's just not the case. That regulation came, we've got a statewide, it's called the Warm Water Resources Steering Committee, and that group is represented from diverse organizations from all over the state. And that's where that regulation proposal came from. It was ultimately adopted. In matter of fact, for the muskie clubs and the tournaments, this regulation really complicated their this is one we're hearing a lot now, is that again, you know, trying to look at what these changes have. So the myth is that one fish per year bag limit has really reduced muskie harvest. We've got some charter boat reports, and again, high catch and release rate, 98 to 100%. With a Creel survey for Lake St. Clair, this was from 2002 to 2004. And again, that's for Michigan waters. Very high catch and release rate. And finally, for Detroit River, 2002 to 2004. Again, Michigan waters, again, very high catch rates. And if we look at, this is data that Mike presented earlier. This is our Detroit River Creel survey in 2015. This covered both the Michigan and the Ontario side. So Mike kind of hit the highlights on the table here, so I'm just going to focus on this one line, which is muskie. A total of 4,600 muskie were caught, and 0 were harvested. That doesn't mean that no muskie were harvested from the Detroit River last year. There probably was some level, very low level of harvest going on, but even on the Canadian side, where it's a much more liberal bag limit, with an on-site Creel survey there the entire year, we did not get into a single angler that harvested fish. So they still have opportunities to harvest fish, but they choose not to. And again, I talk to anglers on a regular basis, and believe me, we get a lot of complaints. So people don't like something, we hear about it, and I have never gotten a call where somebody said, hey, I filled my muskie tag for the year, what do I do now? I want to keep muskie fishing. And again, there's just a lot of evidence there that this regulation change has not affected fishing behavior at all. Okay, so this is looking at that Detroit River Creel data a little bit differently. So we know people that target muskie are very diehard catch and release out. So what we did was we screened those anglers out of this catch. So we looked at about 1,200 of those fish were caught during the legal season by non-muskie anglers. So that means if they chose to harvest that fish, they could. 740 of those were in Ontario, and 460 of those were in Michigan. So even though we've seen, we saw the estimate of hundreds of fish being harvested, we're just not seeing, there's not an interest in people harvesting fish. So it doesn't look like that change in regulation on the Michigan side. We've got the direct comparison with the Ontario side. It doesn't look like that's affecting angler behavior at all. Another myth is about consumption advisories. This table is put out by the Michigan Department of Community Health, and this is set up for each water body. So this is the table for Lake St. Clair, and it's set up by fish species, and it also takes into account size, because the bigger fish are generally older, and so they've been around longer and have more opportunity to accumulate contaminants. But typically, the bigger the fish, the higher the advisory is going to be, or the more restrictive the advisory is going to be. So regardless of size, if we look at musky lunge here, regardless of size, it's got the most restrictive regulation on it. Basically, do not need advisory. So, we've heard people say, well, the 42-inch size limit is restricting harvest because we'd rather have smaller fish because we can eat them. Well, based on the most recent data, the advisories don't need them all. So I want to end by talking about some increased effort. I think Mike touched on it a little bit. The Muskie Recruitment Index Survey, was done last year. That was the first year. Now, typically, when you're looking at survey data like that, you like to look at trends over time. So, is your fund is increasing, decreasing, staying the same? What's going on with it? So, we've got a sample size last year of 1, so we don't have anything to compare it to. But moving forward, we're going to continue to collect that data, and that will allow us to kind of track trends over time. The Nearshore Fish Community Assessment Survey, and that's with the increased capacity of our electrofishing boat now, we're going to be able to collect some targeted information there. We made a commitment to continue to collect expand that database and make that more robust and continue to look at that. And then I touched on field surveys. Field surveys are really important because you're interacting directly with the anglers, you're getting estimates of effort and harvest. You get really good information. We did our creel survey in 2002 to 2004. The previous survey on the system was back in the mid-80s. It was done for a couple of years. The problem with creel surveys is they're very labor intensive and they're very expensive. So it's sort of hard for us to get going on a regular basis. But we've actually got, we shifted some funds and we've got a creel survey on Lake St. Clair in 2016, and it looks like this is going to be a long-term survey. The thought would be to alternate between Lake St. Clair one year and then do the trek from the St. Clair River the following year, just flip-flop back and forth. But I'm really excited about that because I think that's going to give us some really good information. And again, you can track some of those changes over time. But we're going to, in addition to the annual stuff that Mike touched on in his presentation, we're trying to collect additional information to try to address these questions. So with that, Justin, I'll defer if we have time for questions.
Hey, until they kick us out of here.
The lights are still on, so we're good?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to.
The question was, is it online? It's not. I don't know that we really have a good one. I mean, we can certainly give you a copy of the presentation, but I don't know that we have a good one.
Yeah, I don't know what our opportunities are for getting it out. Maybe what we can do is work with our web staff, work with Elise to get a copy of it put on the Clair Station website.
Oh.
And if anybody wants to go take a look at it, it'll be available there.
And get a hold of me too, guys, because if I get your guys' permission, I think Michigan CNET would like to kind of archive what goes on in one of these fishing workshops.
Yeah, that's even better solution.
So give us some time, but I got to clear with everybody that participates.
Thank you for everybody's attention. Here's one night for a good weather.
Thank you.